Scott Carney asked me, how did you overcome your shyness and your fear of being in front of people? Great question, Scott. And the truth is, I haven't really overcome that. I mean, I still get that hit of anxiety and sort of break out in a sweat, especially if I have to do public speaking or if I'm walking into a crowd of people I don't know. I think for me, the desire to be around people and be more involved and be more engaged kind of was bigger than the fear. I got to a point where I had opportunities that I was passing up, interviews and things like that that I was too nervous to do, or events or, places or groups of people or what have you. And I wanted to be involved and I wanted to do those things. So ultimately, the desire to do those things was bigger than the fear itself. So while I still feel a little anxiety in a crowd, I would rather be in the crowd and kind of deal with it than not be there at all. Public speaking, now that's a big one. I mean, even the most confident people sometimes really struggle with public speaking. And it's not something that I do very often. In fact, if I do it at all, it's because I really have something I want to say or something I want to share with that particular group of people. But that has not come easy for me, and sometimes it's easier than others. I'll tell you, a glass of wine at lunch before you do an afternoon presentation can really help a lot. And I'm not a big drinker, but sometimes you just gotta knock the edge off, right? Not that I recommend you speak drunk, but you know what I'm saying, just a glass of wine. Anyway, I'm no longer what I would consider shy. I am still very introverted, and there's a huge difference. An introvert gets drained by a crowd, whereas an extrovert gets energized by a crowd. When we say the word introvert, that doesn't always mean painfully shy and can't speak out and things like that. Sometimes it just means you're the type of person that easily gets drained from being around tons of people. Introverts tend to like their me time, and I really do love mine. I really enjoy time to myself. In fact, I get energized with me time, whereas some people are energized in a crowd and become very blah and drained if they're left alone with themselves too long. I really came out of my shell more in my early 30s, and I think that just kind of came with age and experience and things like that. My very first interview was for Entrepreneur Magazine's radio station. It was a big deal to me, Entrepreneur Magazine. Anyway, I was literally sick to my stomach for like 3 days leading up to the scheduled interview, and luckily I got to do it over the phone. I got to phone in. But man, if you could have seen me like as it was starting and during the first half of that interview, I probably would have been totally green. I was just sick over it. Once I got into it and got on a roll, I really enjoyed it. And I ended up being the weekly feature on that radio station for quite a while. So little things like that kind of boosted my confidence level a little, which was good. And the other thing is, I started out with things like that where I was actually alone in my own environment when I was doing it, instead of actually being in the radio station, in the studio, or being in front of a bunch of people. And the same with this video blog. People say, oh, if you're an introvert, but yet you're putting out all these videos, that's kind of a contradiction. And I disagree, because at this moment, right now, while I'm shooting this video, I'm alone in my office. It's just me and a camera. And so there's a big difference between me sitting here in front of my camera and me sitting here in front of 300 people. That said, I do it. I have stood up in front of 300 people, given a presentation, given a talk, and it still makes me sick. But I think even the most confident people, like I said, get that hit of anxiety or that adrenaline rush, depending on if they're an introvert or an extrovert. Everybody kind of gets that icky feeling right before they go on stage. So anyway, I wouldn't say I've totally overcome my shyness. I think I've done a very good job of deciding what my priorities are. Walking into a crowded room, for example, like when I go to an event, sometimes still, kind of bothers me on the inside. But the thing is, I simply want to be there more than I want to avoid it. And so you just kind of sometimes have to overcome those inner battles. Now on the flip side, I will say, because I'm an introvert and because I'm somewhat shy, if I don't have a really good reason to be there, if I don't want to be there, if there aren't very specific people that I want to see and be around, I won't put myself through it. I won't even bother. What's the point, right? Whereas an extrovert would go into a crowd regardless, just because they enjoy being around other people. So there's a big difference. I'm very picky and choosy about where I go, who I spend time around, what I do, what I invest myself in. And that's mostly because I really enjoy my me time. If I don't really want to go, I would much rather stay home and write a blog post or watch a great movie. And that's just the nature of an introvert. I really like that I've come out of my shell. I really loved that transition because it's no fun to be so self-conscious of yourself or your appearance or your conduct or whatever it is that you're self-conscious about that makes you feel insecure or shy. That's no fun at all. And so for me personally, it's just don't put myself in those situations or get over it so you don't miss out. And I have to make that decision every single time. But really, I think the trick for me, and the reason I came out of my shell in my early 30s was about confidence. It was about realizing a few things about myself. It was about realizing that everyone else felt the exact same way. When you're standing in the middle of a crowd, everyone's concerned about how they're being perceived, more so than they're even concerned about you. Some of those realizations and just being objective and trying to view it from that perspective, and also just putting myself in more and more situations just a little at a time so that I did gain a little more confidence, got a little positive feedback, things like that, and it just became a little bit easier every time. It still makes me sick to speak, like I said. Another thing too, I think that was really helpful for me was several photos and videos that made me realize that shyness is not very attractive. I'm much more approachable if I have a radiant smile or if I'm really into what I'm talking about or feeling confident about something than I am if I'm like kind of cowered in the corner. And just kind of seeing that contrast made me not want to appear that way, even if I felt that way on the inside. Even if I'm in a crowd and somebody points a camera at me, that used to just make me cringe. But now I flash the biggest smile that I can because the difference being it looks a lot better whether you feel it or not. And it's really not about fake it till you make it so much as it is about really being aware of how you feel and why you feel that way, and that it's not necessarily reality, it's just a feeling, it's just a perception, and our perception is our reality. And once I kind of grabbed a hold of that concept and realized that I had the power to change my perception and therefore change my reality, I really started to come out of my shell in a big way. Anyway, I hope that answers your question, Scott, and some of the other questions I've had too about what a contradiction I am. But I won't deny that I'm a contradiction in a lot of ways, so there you go. For those of you that are shy or that are introverts, which are not necessarily always the same, but sometimes go hand in hand, I would be curious to hear, how do you handle crowds or how do you handle situations where you're front and center? And for those of you that are extroverts and get energized by a crowd, I imagine you have a really hard time understanding us, right? If you guys have any tips for overcoming shyness, for coming out of your shell, for gaining confidence, or anything like that, leave a comment because I think this would make for a very interesting discussion.